back, even though the series is irreverent in its nature, I was expecting a lot of backlash to the fact that I was telling biblical stories that have zombies in them. And I didn't have very much backlash toward that. People either took it and explored it or ignored it. But boy, the fact that God was referred to in the feminine in the first book, that got people riled. I did not even expect that that would happen, but it got people really mad. But it was for much the same reason. I was really fascinated by the Jewish concept of the Shekinah, the feminine presence of God that descends over the mercy seat in the temple and fills that space. And I was really fascinated by all the moments in the Old Testament where the metaphor for God or the image for God or the analogy for God is the feminine one. And I was like, oh, there's an entire literature here that we ignore, either accidentally or on purpose. And it would be really, really interesting to see what could I discover about the relationship between a prophet and his God, or about this ancient people, by looking at what we've been ignoring. It's my trollish behavior again. I want to come and say, oh, what did we miss? And that was what we were missing. So it actually became central to the whole psychology of this character of the weeping prophet Jeremiah in this book, and that his relationship to his desire to protect his wife, and his desire to protect his city, which he conceives of in feminine terms, and his desire to protect his God, all get kind of interwoven. It was really, really interesting, because it also gave me a way to explore one of the most beautiful of ancient texts to me is the Book of Lamentations. It's this short little piece that's included in Bibles, and it's reportedly by the prophet Jeremiah mourning for the city after it's fallen into ruins. And in the book of Jeremiah, you have all these passages that get quoted and misquoted and appropriated by street preachers and televangelists of the might and wrath of an angry God. But in the Lamentations, and also in Jeremiah, just ignored most of the time when we read it, are all these other images and powerfully heart-wrenching passages about a God weeping for her people, weeping for the children who are being sacrificed on the hill of Tophet, weeping when she sees the blood on the skirts of the worshipers coming back into the town, weeping because there are people starving outside in the street while the mother inside the house, the middle-class woman, is baking bread and singing hymns to her God while there's people starving outside the window, children in the streets. And just such powerful, poignant passages. I'm like, nobody ever talks about that, but that's what captured my heart when I read it. So writing one book that had a feminine vision of Judeo-Christian God was a way of distancing the story from the part that we always focus on, the wrath of the jealous Old Testament God, in order to focus on something that's equally as much a part of the Old Testament stories, but that we never focus on.
And it was provocative to some people.
Yeah, which probably should not have surprised me, but it did come as a surprise. I thought people would be mad about
the zombies, right?
Oh my goodness, you give God a feminine pronoun, and wow, that really. I always just figured that God was not exclusively of either pronoun, but it got some people very mad. So the only time that I really stirred controversy was that.
I felt the Gnostic texts refer to God in the feminine.
Yes. Yeah, that
I thought he said it was a man.
Of Gnostic theology.
Yeah. They got heat too for that.
When the early Christians were speaking Greek, the Holy Spirit was feminine,
Yes.
Hagia Sophia, and then when the Romans took over, it became Spiritus Sanctus, which is masculine.
Yep, that made a big difference. Yeah, for me it was an incredibly beautiful thing to play with, because part of the amazing thing about the book, the Hebrew book of Jeremiah, is that it's a sense of this prophet whose mission is not going to succeed. He is going to watch his city die, and he and his God are weeping over the death of the city. So I tell the story where Yirmiyahu is the only one in the city who can hear God weeping behind her veil in the temple. And no one else can hear. And he wakes at night sometimes and hears
different perspective on the biblical. It did for me when I read your book. I wanted to ask, well, sorry,
Oh.
Christine back.
Hi, I have a question for Miss Morganfield. I never knew that about Quetzalcoatl. That he was anti blood sacrifice on top of the pyramids of the sun.
Yes.
So who did those Aztecs with the knife wielding? Which, by the way, I climbed that pyramid. It is horrible. Anyway, who were they like all jazzed about?
When we're talking about the Aztecs, we're talking about the god Huitzilopochtli, who is the god of war. He also shared his temple up on top of the pyramid was shared with the rain god Tlaloc, who actually they would drown children for him.
Nice.
But the tearing out of the hearts is very specifically for Huitzilopochtli, who also is an incarnation of Tanatui, who is the god of the sun.
Oh, hence the pyramid of the sun.
Quetzalcoatl he was worshipped as the wind, and so his temples were circular, and they were down on the precinct, and he was considered to be the head of the priesthood. So everybody who was a high priest was called Quetzalcoatl, even the ones who were up there ripping hearts out and stuff. But no.
Thank you.
I think Todd also had a question.
I appreciate Stant's use of Jeremiah's lament. And in the New Testament, when Jesus enters Jerusalem, there's a similar lament, and God is once again a mother hen in that image, weeping over the chicks and the young hens.
It's actually a very, very common image in the text, and it's one that plays an important role in Judaism, but that thinks in part to the Roman gloss over that religion has. It's something we usually ignore, but it is a huge element I wanted to bring up.
I have a question for Tracy. So I want you to, actually it's not a real question. I want you to expound upon some things. Because when I heard your stories and when I've read a little bit of them, I'm in the middle of it and I'm enjoying it. So Tracy writes about actually, because I am so ignorant, but she writes about several cultures and myths and mythological cultural aspects in Mesoamerica. So if you have a really dumb reader, how do you expound upon this so that it just doesn't become this exotic mesh, but that you can make sense? And I will say I can make sense, and I am not that clever. So just expound on that a little bit.
Can you expound on that? What's the question exactly?
I want you to tell us how you tell a reader that's not very knowledgeable that these are not all one exotic culture, but they're very different in this part of the world. Just like Roman myth is different from Greek, or, you know, we don't often know that much about that, or people like me, about Mesoamerica. How do you show that?
Actually, I've never really thought about this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You do it very well, though.
You do it well, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I guess I just kind of do it. I mean, I do have some other cultures that I introduce into the, I think I try and have to be as a kind of, foil. Yeah, kind of, because there we have the Toltecs, who are the civilization in the Valley of Mexico, and they're in constant warfare with the Chichimecs up north, who have similar kind of ideas about things, but in some regards, but very different ones in other.
They're such barbarians, I hate them.
They're very uncivilized. They are, they should be living in the desert north, and they should not be down here trying to
Learn to eat with a fork, you know?
Yeah, we don't get a whole lot in the first book about the differences in the cultures. It's mostly.
It comes in the second book.
Yeah, the second book, where she actually starts having contact with the Chichimecs and has to live with them in some regard. she starts to learn not just their differences, but how they are the same as well, and how they can use the overlap in learning to come together as a single people with a single goal, which is to build Tola and human sacrifice. So,
And they have the same gods in part, but they view them differently, right?
yes, yeah, that was one thing about Mesoamerican gods. They have tons of different names and the gods each have all these different aspects, and they have a different name when they're under that aspect. Like, Quetzalcoatl, he's not just the god of the wind, he's also the god of the evening star and morning star. And he's also said to be the twin of the one of the gods of the underworld, Shalal, who is the deformed one, because he is said to have his feet all backwards. And then, like, smoking mirror is, he's also the night wind. He confronts people on crossroads and makes them fight. And if they win, then they will be very rich. And if they fail, they will fall into slavery. And so there's just all these different aspects that I tried to bring in different ways, and so I tried to bring, like, the Chichimecs believe this about smoking mirror. Smoking mirror doesn't even exist down in Toltec stuff, but just because he doesn't exist in their culture doesn't mean he doesn't actually exist. So, yeah.
Why don't you just answer my question?
I played with it really similar. Actually, that very idea of how different people, even within the same culture, especially in the ancient world where you have very different tribal cultures coming into contact infrequently, and then really that mix of beliefs and things getting translated across so many boundaries. I play with that throughout my fantasy. And there's a novella I wrote. It's short. It's 45 pages, so it's not in print, and you can find it on the Kindle, where there's an absolutely fantastic audiobook that makes me cry. It's called I Will Hold My Death Close, and it's a retelling of the story of Jephthah's daughter from the Old Testament. Jephthah, who is to be sacrificed to Jephthah's God. And Jephthah is of mixed heritage in the Old Testament. He has Hebrew family and he has Canaanite family, which is a very uneasy thing. It makes him, in part, an outcast in that society. And so when I tell the story of Jephthah's daughter, and also because Jephthah marries a Canaanite, so when I tell the story from the perspective of Jephthah's daughter, it's her story. I will hold my death close. She has a Canaanite mother who is gone, who's been devoured by the dead. And she has her Hebrew mixed blood father, who now is out to sacrifice her. And one of the many things she has to come to terms with through this story is her own relationship to her culture and her people and her God. Is her God is her God her father's God, this hungry God that must be fed? Or is that what the world is? That men are hungry and devour women, that gods are hungry and devour mortals, that the dead are hungry and devour the living? Is it her mother's God, the God she remembers from the songs her mother sang to lull her to sleep? Is her mother's God, is God like her mother's God, running beside her in the dark like a deer, fleeing with her as she runs? And she has to figure out, not only, she's this young, probably 13, 14, she has to figure out who she is and what world she's fleeing through in this story. And part of it is that a part of it is the sense that there's the religion of the time, all these different aspects of the divine and all these different ways to understand your heritage. And she's kind of trying to walk through them and find one that fits this dark night that she's running through. I didn't say that very well, but it's tremendously fascinating.
I have a question for both of you, but I don't want to trample on anybody if anybody else has a question.
I wanted to kind of follow on to some of the things that you were both saying, because it really struck me that a common theme for both of you has been the presence of, to use your title, strangers in the land. I was kind of curious, does that give you an extra tool for reaching the reader, the presence of a culture that's so strange and hasn't even been explained to the culture in the story?
Yeah.
Short answer, yes. Long answer, where I think humanity grows, where I think we make leaps in art, or storytelling, or religion, or science, or philosophy, is when two very different traditions meet. And it's why reading translated works is so important. It's also what fascinates me about fantasy fiction, is it's about the encounter with something that's utterly strange to you. And in that moment you have a choice. You can respond with fear, or you can respond with wonder and draw nearer to get a better look. Or fear and draw back, or, depending on who you are, fear either means you run or you pick up a hammer and one of the two. And that's always what happens when we encounter people that look different to us, or situations that look strange to us. We tend to choose one of those two responses. And I think those moments where so much is possible are what I want to write about, or what I want to read about. Those moments where very different people come into contact.
Is it a culture of the winners though, when you do all your research, both of you? So you see all these myths, you build worlds from them. Do you see patterns of why certain interpretations of myth and divine become more prominent? Do you understand my question? Because I figure if you do a lot of research, you see, so why don't you notice, why is that 2 sentences about this woman that nobody knows about? Why did so few translations? Why was female God kind of lost a little bit in translation for long periods of time?
Language.
Yeah,
it's more than that. It's politics, it's a lot of things, but at its most basic level, a lot of it is just the language you're using as these stories get translated. I don't know your name, but you made such a beautiful point that when you tell stories in Latin, you get something very, very different than when you're telling them in Greek.
I think in the case of this stuff, because the specific myth that I started with was very much a politically motivated one. The person who commissioned the writing of it was trying to establish the royal lineage of the woman that he was going to marry.
That's crass.
So yeah, he very much wanted to make sure that his wife's bloodline went back to the Toltecs, which is where the Aztecs they claimed their right to rule in Mesoamerica, in Mexico. And I think too that there may have been because of the nature of how she was used against him and used against Topolzien, that there was a move to try and discredit the teachings of Quetzalcoatl, because I'll just want to say it. He commits incest with his sister. This is what they say. Yeah. So I believe that, and that's the only myth in which you hear it. You never hear that in any of the other myths. And of course, she doesn't show up in any other myths.
So that was created to like.
I believe it was.
Yeah.
To discredit Quetzalcoatl as a god, because all the rest of the gods they had already kind of swept it under the rug. Tezcatlipoca is obviously the incarnation of Satan and everything like this, but Quetzalcoatl is really kind of a Christ-like figure. So we need to go ahead and discredit him as well. Yeah, we need to pull people completely away from any kind of idea that he and Christ have anything in common. So
it's fascinating. You get a sense that this has been done through history a lot.
yes.
It's just that you don't quite know where always unless you have done thorough research. Guys, thank you. Tracy and Stant will join us again a little bit later in our writer's workshop. If anybody is a writer or interested in becoming one or is becoming one, you should catch that one because it's real interesting. And also they will be continuing to show their books downstairs. Thanks, guys.